I was 28 the day the house learned my name again. I say it that way because for years I had been the one whispering to it, paint under my fingernails, knees bruised from tile palms, nicked by rose thorns promising the sagging porch that I could be the kind of woman who kept a promise. The deed said it clearly enough, the county seal stamped like a small sun beside my name. But paper is colder than breath, and it took 9 years of Saturdays and sore muscles for the walls to recognize my footsteps and settle as if to say, "All right, then you belong." My grandparents had left the place to me when I was 19, 4 bedrooms, 3 acres, and 1,000 tiny tasks that felt like prayers when I did them alone at dusk, and the house had been my school and my savings account and my sanctuary ever since. If you had asked me a year ago who I was, I would have said, a practical woman with calloused hands and steady work, the older sister who knew where the shut-off valve was and how to stretch a paycheck and why the rosebush by the kitchen window needed more morning sun. I would have said I was engaged to a man who hated conflict more than he loved truth, and that I didn't notice the difference until later. I would have said that my sister, 4 years younger, had been the sun in our family's sky for so long that I learned to make a life in the shade and tell myself I liked the cool. There are photo albums full of her tiaras and trophies, and every room turning to find her smile, while I hover in the background like punctuation proof that the sentence continues. I don't think our parents meant to map us like that. The map just drew itself, and then we followed the roads it made. When she came to me 6 months ago, eyes damp, story, trembling, job, lost, love, lost, I heard my grandparents' voices in the quiet of the house. You help family, they would have said, which is the kind of sentence that is only simple until it isn't. My fiancé Mark did that thing with his brow that meant he wanted to be applauded for reasonableness. Just for a while, he told me, and he looked like a man offering peace when he was really begging to be spared discomfort. I said yes, because people like me say yes. It's how we keep the roof steady. I gave her the guest room, and the house generous as always made space without complaint. At first there was a politeness to the days. She slept late and sighed loudly and spoke in soft pastels about bad luck, and I let my chest swell with a kind of mercy that might have been pride in a better suit. A week passed then, too. The campaign began so gently, it took me a while to recognize the banners the living room rearranged into something sleeker and meaner to light my reading chair exiled to the corner. The fridge colonized by sugar and salt. The old mug white ceramic hairline crack near the handle too ordinary for anyone but me, disappearing and replaced by glitter that refused to hold heat. When I asked, she shrugged because some people have been taught that shrugging is the same as apologizing, and that you should accept it like flowers on your birthday. Mark said she had a fresh perspective, as if rearranging a room reshaped a life in any way that mattered. I started to notice the gravity in the house change. The objects I loved didn't quite come back to my hand the same way. Laughter unspooled from the couch, while I cooked a shared brightness that made me feel like a stranger in a home where my sweat still dried in the grain of the floorboards. They would lean together over her phone heads, nearly touching, and spring apart when I entered with the flustered annoyance of a club disturbed by a janitor. That's what it felt like I was cleaning up after people who dirtied rooms with entitlement and called it air. The dread I'd brought out of childhood returned familiar as an old bruise and settled beneath my sternum like a coin I couldn't cough up. It was a Tuesday when the quiet snapped. I came home early, weary in the simple way of honest work, hoping to sit in the evening as if it were a bath. Down the hall in the room where I pay bills and keep the house's paper heart, a light hunched over 2 heads. I pushed the door and saw my laptop open to interest rates and charts, and a bank's blue logo, and words that turned my stomach to water: refinancing, settlement, equity. My name was printed on the deed, my grandparents' gift. The marrow of those pages, and there they were, my fiancé and my sister tilting the screen to measure what they might carve out of me. Mark snapped it shut and stammered. Jessica lied with a speed that had muscle memory, and I felt something old and clean uncoil in me, anger without heat, the kind that doesn't waver. I meant to talk to him alone the next day to set an ultimatum carefully on the table like a fragile dish. But conspirators love ceremony, and they staged theirs 24 hours later. When I opened the door, they were already there on the couch, hands folded like petitioners before a king who does not live here. My work bag bit into my shoulder as if to anchor me to the floor. Jessica placed a hand on her stomach, a small performance that told me she had practiced this in a mirror. "I'm pregnant," she announced, and the air changed shape. "And he's the father." Mark stared at a spot just past me, as if confessing to a lamp is easier than confessing to the woman who thought his future would be a room they shared. The floor tipped, the house steady as ever held me up. Before I could gather syllables, she continued explaining that a nursery needed space, that the master bedroom was obvious, that the guest room would not do that. In fact, here she paused for effect. It would be best if I found my own place. "My own place," she said, while sitting in the one place in the world that could answer back with paper and wood and time mine. They had even paid a deposit on a studio downtown, a kindness sharpened into a knife. That detail thudded me back into my body, and with it came a coldness I'd only felt twice, once in the hospital, when my grandfather stopped breathing once on a highway shoulder at 2 in the morning, when a stranger's headlights dragged across the inside of my car like a net. I walked past them, their mouths moving words trying to stick, and opened the oak cabinet my grandfather built. The bottom drawer slid out on its old rails. I took the folder and set it on the coffee table the way a judge might set down the law. "Silence," I said to Mark, and heard myself for the first time, not the big sister, or the fixer, or the woman who makes space, but the owner. I slid the deed from its sleeve and smoothed the edge with my palm as if calming a page. My name, black ink, county seal. There is a particular peace in pointing to proof. No second name, no half, no him, just mine. Something in her face cracked. She tried to rally with a shriek about technicalities, the way people do when paper reminds them that the world is not arranged around their convenience. She used the word family like a crowbar and pregnancy like a shield, but neither opened the door she wanted. I reached into the folder again and produced notice to vacate forms I'd printed at lunch because that's who I am. I read the rules when the room starts to tilt. One copy for him, one for her, placed gently on the table like the opposite of a gift. I explained market rates months back, rent, utilities records. I used the word lawyer because sometimes a single word can put a spine in a boundary. She stared. He trembled. The house breathed around us approving. I picked up my grandmother's small music box from the bookshelf. She had held it by 2 fingers earlier and called it junk, and I had learned in that moment that under the glitter and charm, my sister despised anything that held memory she could not control, and I went to my room and locked the door. I did not cry. I listened to the refrigerator hum and the old pipes exhale, and in the new quiet, I understood I had been waiting for their permission to be who the deed already said I was. The days that followed strained and hissed like a line about to snap. She slammed doors and invented the kind of contempt that only works on people who still need your approval. He wrote sorry on scraps like apologies were coupons you could apply at checkout. I ignored them both because there is a silence that is sulk and a silence that is sovereignty, and I had finally found the second kind. When he cornered me in the kitchen, to blame her for everything, to paint himself as a man toppled by a woman's wiles, because that story always feels safer in the mouth than the one where a grown man chooses cowardice, I handed him an envelope with the court stamp and the sheriff's timeline in its belly. His face fell into it like a mirror dropped onto cement. The house's old clock ticked, satisfied. What I didn't see coming had the clean, merciless logic of science. Their last loud argument rattled the windows, a duet of accusations that sounded to my ears like two people discovering each other in unflattering light. The next day, he was gone. A week later, 2 days before the deadline, my best friend showed me an anonymous post from a local forum where men confess their foolishness and call it warning a prenatal paternity test an X with money, a probability of paternity at 0. A confession wrung from a woman who imagined the world would never ask for evidence. The baby was not his. The lie was larger and cheaper than I had allowed myself to imagine. That night, a Mercedes I recognized from photographs glided up the drive, and she left without a backward glance. The house inhaled and held it, and for the first time in months, the rooms had their old sound again, space-light air. Later, I would repaint the guest room a green that looked like healing and give it a name that honored a man who taught me generosity without martyrdom. Later, I would open my door to a woman who needed a place to breathe and felt the word home settle around both of us like a shawl. But for now, I walked from room to room, like a woman returning to her own body after a long illness, touching wood and fabric and light, the way you touch, proof gently, gratefully awake. And the next morning, the house felt lighter, as if it had exhaled the last of their perfume. Sunlight leaked through the blinds in thin golden threads and touched the walls like forgiveness. I brewed coffee in silence. It no longer tasted bitter. It tasted like possession, the simple, honest kind that comes after too many years of giving things away that were never meant to leave. I spent the morning cleaning, not out of spite but ritual. Their fingerprints still smudged the glass table. Her perfume clung to the curtains, his cologne to the hallway. Every wipe, every rinse, every fold of a towel felt like reclaiming oxygen. The smell of soap and lemon rose through the rooms, purging months of deceit. When I opened the windows, the house sighed, as if thanking me for letting it breathe again. I thought I'd feel empty, but what I felt was distance. Not loneliness, just distance. The kind of quiet that waits to see who you'll be next. I found myself thinking about the girl I had been at 19 when I first inherited the house, how I'd stood on the same porch, terrified of the future, but sure that love would be the easy part. Back then, I thought betrayal was something that happened once, like a lightning strike. I didn't know it could happen slowly, disguised as conversation and laughter slipping into your life, until you mistake it for warmth. The town already knew. It always does. The story leaked out through whispers at the grocery store and at my office. Pity followed me like a draft, but I didn't hide from it. Let them talk. I'd learned that shame only grows where silence feeds it, and I was done feeding anything that hurt me. Mark texted once. Just one message, I'm sorry. I wish things had been different. I stared at it for a long minute, then deleted it. I didn't need to reply. Regret was his new language. Silence was mine. My sister didn't contact me at all, which was almost kind. The last I heard, she'd moved in with the man from the Mercedes, the one who believed her story long enough to inherit her chaos. A week later, I found a folded letter inside the mailbox with no return address. The handwriting was delicate, looped, almost old-fashioned. It was from my grandmother's friend Mrs. Langley, who lived 2 towns over. Sarah. I know you've been through fire. Your grandmother used to say some women are born with soft hands because life will ask them to carry sharp things. Don't let the sharpness turn you hard. Turn it into light. That's what she did. I cried for the first time since the night they left, not out of sadness but recognition. I realized then that the house wasn't just wood and walls, it was inheritance. Not money, but marrow. It had seen generations of women learn the same lesson in different ways, that survival is a language we teach ourselves one boundary at a time. I began to fix things, not the furniture, but the life around it. The small things came first, replanting the roses, sanding the porch rail, painting the guest room, a pale green that looked like new beginnings. Every brushstroke was therapy, every petal, a small confession. I left the nursery items she'd bought in a box by the road. They were gone by evening, and I didn't wonder who took them. Some stories don't need endings, they just need to leave. It was during one of those quiet afternoons with paint still drying on my fingers that an idea came. It didn't arrive like lightning, it arrived like a whisper from the house itself. I'd been part of a local women's group that supported single mothers and women leaving abusive homes. We'd always struggled to find safe housing. What if this place, this house that had survived betrayal and lies, could become shelter instead of a shrine to pain? I called the group's coordinator that evening. I have space, I said. More than I need. Within a month, the first woman moved in, a quiet mother named Elise, with a son who drew on everything except the walls, as if instinctively respecting the house's history. I gave them the room that used to belong to my sister. Watching them settle in felt strangely right, like rewriting the script my family had handed me. I told Elise she could stay as long as she needed. She cried when she thanked me, and I realized kindness doesn't always come from love. Sometimes it comes from understanding what cruelty costs. Life found its rhythm again. I went back to work full-time, taught myself how to fix the fence, and started baking on weekends. The house smelled like cinnamon instead of secrets. On Sundays, I'd sit on the porch with coffee and listen to the world without flinching. Then one morning, I received an envelope stamped with the county court's seal. My lawyer had followed up on the property filings. They'd tried once more to contest the deed. My sister's name appeared in the motion. I should have felt angry. Instead, I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from someone who's already seen the worst and lived through it. I drove to the courthouse wearing my grandmother's brooch, the same one she'd worn when she signed her own first deed. The judge looked over the documents, then looked at me. It didn't take long. Paper is loyal when you've done the work right. The motion was denied. Permanently. My ownership reaffirmed. The house mine. The silence after his gavel dropped sounded like closure. When I stepped outside, the air was cool, the kind that feels like forgiveness brushing your skin. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post about it. Some victories are meant to live quietly, like roots under the soil, strong unseen, and sustaining everything above them. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window, something my grandmother used to do for luck. I whispered a thank you to the empty air, not just for justice, but for the strange, fierce peace that had followed. Elise joined me, carrying her son on her hip. "He calls this place magic," she said, smiling shyly. "He says the walls keep nightmares away." I looked around at the soft light, the clean lines of the walls, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the same sounds that once reminded me of loneliness, now sounding like belonging. "He's not wrong," I told her. "This house knows how to protect people now." After she went to bed, I sat by the window watching the moon rise over the yard. The old oak swayed slowly, heavy with leaves, roots deep and unbothered by the storms it had outlasted. For the first time, I saw myself in it, not the woman who had been betrayed, but the one who remained. I thought of my sister sometimes in passing. Not with hate anymore, just distance. Some people never learn that taking doesn't make them rich, it just makes them hollow. I wished her peace, but far away from mine. The house creaked softly like an old friend settling into sleep. I smiled, closed my eyes, and whispered the words that had taken me years to believe: "I'm home." The weeks turned into months, and the seasons folded over one another gently like clean sheets. By autumn, the oak tree behind the house had started shedding its leaves in slow motion, painting the ground in copper and gold. I used to dread this time of year, the way it reminded me of endings, but that year it felt different. The leaves didn't look like loss. They looked like release. The house had become more than shelter. It had become story. Women came and went, each with her own silence, her own small earthquake. I learned how to listen without fixing, how to hold space without being consumed. There was Clara, who couldn't sleep through the night for fear of doors closing, and May, who sang softly while cooking, as if apologizing for taking up sound. Each one brought something that changed the house's rhythm, and each left something behind: drawings, notes, laughter that stayed in the corners like sunlight trapped in dust. Sometimes, when the evenings stretched long and the crickets began their low song, I would walk through the halls barefoot, feeling the creak of the floorboards underfoot, remembering when those same sounds used to mean ghosts of betrayal. Now they meant life. They meant footsteps that didn't leave out of anger, but out of healing. But peace, I've learned, isn't an end, it's a bridge between storms. One night near the end of winter, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was hoarse, tired, and threaded with something I hadn't heard in years: shame. "Sarah, it's me." I didn't answer right away. There are names that live in your bones even after you think you've forgotten them. It was my sister, Jessica. She said she didn't want anything, just a chance to talk. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, stripped of the confidence that once filled entire rooms. She told me the man she'd left with had turned out to be everything he'd accused others of: being controlling, cruel, and careful enough to leave no marks where people could see. She had left him 2 months ago. She was living in a rented room, pregnant, no longer working in a diner outside town. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even justice. But what I felt was older than either, something like quiet recognition. I'd seen that kind of broken before. I'd been that kind of broken before. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said finally. I needed to tell someone who knew me before I became this." The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, shallow and uncertain. I didn't offer comfort, not right away. Sometimes kindness too quickly given can feel like permission to repeat the wound. But after a long silence, I said, "I hope you find your way out. That's all." She started to cry. I let her. We didn't say goodbye. We just stayed there, suspended in the static, two women who had finally run out of lies. After that night, she didn't call again. I didn't expect her to. But something in me loosened, as if a door that had been stuck for years had finally opened just enough to let light in. Spring came early that year. The air smelled of rain and forgiveness. The house filled again, this time with laughter from the kitchen, the clatter of breakfast plates, the sound of Elisa's son learning to whistle. I'd never thought healing could sound so ordinary. One Sunday morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, my feet tucked beneath a blanket, watching the neighborhood slowly wake. A woman walking her dog stopped by the gate and smiled. "You're Sarah, right? I heard what you're doing here, helping women restart. That's incredible." I smiled back, humbled by how casually she said it. Once my name had been whispered behind hands: scandal, betrayal, pity. Now it was being spoken in daylight, in kindness. That was its own kind of justice. Later that day, I opened a drawer in the study where I kept all the papers that used to define my life: deeds, court documents, eviction notices. I took out the deed, the one with the county seal, and ran my fingers across the ink of my name. It didn't burn anymore. It glowed. The paper that had once been armor had become just proof that I survived, that I rebuilt, that I learned. And then, like life does, the past returned one final time, not as threat but as test. A letter came in the mail with my parents' return address. It was short, my father's handwriting. The words were stiff, formal, almost brittle. They wanted to see me. My mother wasn't well. "She asks for you," he wrote. I read it 3 times. My body reacted before my mind did, the old tightness in my chest, the quickened pulse, the voice whispering, "Don't go back." But curiosity, no closure, has its own pull. I drove there on a gray afternoon. The road home looked smaller, as if my childhood had been drawn on a smaller canvas. When I parked in front of the house I'd once called ours, the paint was chipped, the grass overgrown. Decay had a smell, faint but unmistakable. Inside, my mother lay in the living room, frail, her voice softer than memory. My father hovered nearby like a man guarding the ruins of his pride. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were thin, bird-like. "Jessica told us what she did," she whispered. "We didn't believe her at first. We should have. We owe you more than apologies." I didn't answer. There are moments when words would only shrink what's sacred. Forgiveness, if it comes, doesn't always wear the name. Sometimes it's just absence of anger, of fear, of the need to be right. When I left, the sky had cleared. The sun broke through the clouds in strips of gold, the way it always used to after summer storms on the farm. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me. Carrying hate is like drinking poison and calling it strength. I'd set the cup down. That night, I returned to my own house, where laughter still lingered in the air. Elise was reading on the couch, her son asleep under a blanket. I stood at the doorway watching them for a moment, then whispered to the house, "See, we did it." The floor creaked softly in reply. Later, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter, not to send, just to finish the circle. To my younger self: "You will lose things that were never yours. You will mistake endurance for love, silence for peace. One day you will understand that strength is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain define you. You will rebuild everything they broke. And you will do it alone, not because no one helps, but because this time you will finally trust your own hands. I folded it and placed it beside the deed. Two pieces of paper, one proof of ownership, one proof of becoming. Outside, the wind moved through the oak branches. The moonlight spilled across the porch in soft silver ribbons. I breathed deeply, feeling the air move through the house like a living thing. This was the same place where betrayal had lived. Now it was a refuge. It no longer smelled of loss. It smelled of coffee book soap laughter, and of something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the night sink in. The world had gone quiet in the best possible way. I smiled and whispered into the calm. I kept my promise, Grandma. The house is still standing. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever lost everything and rebuilt yourself from the ashes, know that you are not alone. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you've learned from your own storms.